Okay. Good morning. Welcome to the 2023 Annual Conference and Book Fair in Seattle, Washington. My name is Stephanie Vanderslice. I'm a member of the AWP Board of Directors. Here's a visual description of myself. I am a short, middle-aged woman with long gray hair. Yes, rocking the gray, wearing a gray and black dress. The Association of Writers and Writing Programs is a small but mighty nonprofit organization that amplifies the voices of writers and the academic programs and organizations that serve them, all while championing diversity and excellence in creative writing. I am a member of AWP's Board of Directors, but first and foremost, I am a member of AWP. Membership with AWP provides me with writing resources year-round, but just as importantly, it allows me to support other writers, especially those who are just starting out. My first AWP was 2003. My membership dues help writers find meaningful careers and publication opportunities and make services like the Writer-to-Writer mentorship program possible. If you aren't already, I invite you to become a member today. Together, we are AWP. And we are delighted to bring you this event today. I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of our conference sponsors and the literary partner hosting this event, Hugo House. Yes, I know. Our literary partners and sponsors allow AWP to present these extraordinary literary events and help keep our conference affordable and especially accessible. Please join me in thanking all of our conference sponsors and partners for their support and participation. Now, before we start, I need to do some brief housekeeping. So please silence your cell phones. Remember, there's no flash photography allowed during the presentation. Respect seats marked as reserved for attendees with accessibility needs. Please give the authors about 10 minutes after the presentation to get to the book signing table before approaching them to have your book signed. Lastly, we ask that you please be aware of your fellow attendees who may have disabilities and help us make AWP more accessible. Specifically, if you see a barrier to accessibility, let us know by calling or texting our accessibility hotline at 240-269-6635. Please also be aware of those with invisible disabilities and do not question anyone's use of an accommodation. Thank you. And now it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome Claire Detterer, who is going to introduce this fantastic event. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the introduction and Hugo House for having us and AWP. We're so excited to be here and talk to each other. I think I can speak for all of us. I have such huge admiration for these women's work. So we're going to start by just talking a little bit, each of us, about our own work, and then maybe reading a little bit from our own work, and especially, I think, some selections that connect with our own experience of motherhood, and then we'll connect those ideas to what it means to write about that in post-Roe America, or to try to write about it. We'll see. So I'll begin by introducing Angela Garbes. She is the author of Essential Labor, Mothering as Social Change called A Landmark and a Lightning Storm by The New Yorker. Sweet. Her first book, Like a Mother, was an NPR Best Book of the Year and finalist for a Washington State Book Award in Nonfiction. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Cut, New York, Bon Appetit, and been featured on NPR's Fresh Air. Garbes is also a community advocate, for reproductive justice, working families, and equity and inclusion. A first-generation Filipina American, she lives with her family in Seattle. I will add that I am a huge fan of Angela's work, and I will add another PS, which is that my older kid is a bookseller at Third Place in Seward Park, which is Angela's home bookstore, and they totally lit up when I mentioned Angela's name and said she is, quote, incredibly kind and just generally very cool.
Oh, that's so nice.
I'll hand that over to you,
Report from
Angela.
the front lines. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I'll kick it over to you.
Okay, so we're doing introductions?
I am introducing you.
Okay.
You're going to kind of do your thing.
Okay, great.
And then you'll introduce the next guy.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for
You're
bearing
welcome.
with
Yeah,
me.
I can keep us on track. It's okay.
Yeah, it's all, this room is so big. Everything feels sort of overwhelming. I feel kind of intimidated. Not intimidated, I belong here on this panel, but it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. So I'm a little scattered in that way. So I guess I would start by saying that writing about motherhood, which I am solidly doing now, and writing about mothering and care work, is actually the hugest surprise of my life. I started out as a food writer for the local alt weekly here, The Stranger, when it was still a print publication that came out weekly, and was somewhat invested in writers. And so the fact that I'm doing this now is really, it was a series of, I wrote a piece about breast milk, because I thought it was completely related to my writing as a food writer. That went viral. I had an opportunity to write a book from that. I had a lot of questions about pregnancy, but I was not like a science writer. So I ended up writing a book that was, I like to think of it as a book about decolonizing pregnancy and motherhood, but I think that was a little too spicy for marketing materials. But that book kind of led me to publishing that book about motherhood. Really sort of showed me the limitations of how the market perceives stories about mothering and parenting, female stories in general. So for my second book, I was like, I'm totally doing something else. I'm going to write this book of essays about the human body, about how the bodies we were born into, for better or worse, affect every level of how we interact with the world, from our own bodies to institutions to communities. That book was due in July of 2020. I spent 2.5 years really struggling to write it, and then the pandemic happened. And within 2 weeks after the pandemic, when I had no childcare for my, at the time, 5- and 2-year-old, I called up my editor and I was like, there's just no way this is gonna happen. So I extended the deadline for a year. 6 months later, I still had no idea what I was gonna do, how I was gonna do it. I had basically stopped doing my writing work because my husband's job gives us health care and a regular paycheck, and my fairly successful writing career does not. But so through that time, when I was really feeling like maybe what's best is if my creative urge would just die, I realized that actually the most important work I could be doing, as much as I missed myself and that identity, which is important to me, care work was the only thing that mattered. Keeping my children alive, keeping my community safe by staying at home. And I just realized I had a lot to say about that. And how did we get to this place in our country where the majority of care work, not just child care, but elder care, disability care, respite care, is handled by Black and brown women for poverty wages. That is a legacy of slavery, and without Black and brown women taking care of people, our society really screamed to a halt. So I wanted to write about that, and I wanted to write about how the pandemic was hitting women and women of color the hardest. Unemployment rate soaring, 865,000 women leaving the workforce in September of 2020 alone because we couldn't do online school proctoring and professional work and domestic labor. So I published a piece about it. Thank God for the internet, things go a little viral, and I was like, oh, Elizabeth Warren retweeted this, I think maybe, this is cool, maybe I have something to say about it. So I told my editor I want to completely change course, and I'm now, forget feeling any type of way about writing about mothering, I'm doubling down, because nothing matters more than this. And you know, our very paltry care system in America has been exposed for what it is, which is unethical and immoral and racist. And I am never going to shut up about it. And that's how this book, Essential Labor, was born. And I think I'll stop now. I wasn't going to read, but Claire was kind enough to encourage me to. And I haven't read from it in a while, so I'm going to. I believe all care work should be visible, paid, and collective, and public, and publicly funded. Central to pre-colonial Philippine culture is bayanihan, which means communal solidarity. Its roots lie in the shared labor of farming, child-rearing, house building, and house moving. Throughout Philippine folk art, you'll find a recurring image of a group of people moving a nipa hut hoisted on bamboo sticks, a la Cleopatra being carried on a litter. In a tropical monsoon-heavy climate, flooding is not uncommon. Through bayanihan, a community could relocate a family by literally lifting the home and moving it to higher ground. What would it take to go back? Not go back in time, but to really look back, understand other cultures, cultures under threat of erasure, cultures subjected to force and exploitation, resilient cultures that continue to thrive despite colonization, and glean wisdom from them. We don't need to recreate social structures wholesale, but we could learn more communal aspects of living, use them to rethink and reshape American family life. Building relationships can be messy and awkward. Interdependence requires real communication, empathy, sorting through calendars and logistics. It means misunderstandings, problem solving, asking and listening, not just popping in and dropping off, but sometimes lingering and running late. But I'll take pulling someone through my doorway so we can finish a conversation about our children's conflict because the oven timer is going off and I don't want to burn the potatoes over meaningless small talk accompanied by warm wine and a sad fruit platter any day. I've grown to love the casual, chaotic negotiations required of interdependence. My time and attention are not so precious that I cannot give them to another child, another adult, another family. They can be given freely because, it turns out, I have so much to give. Sorry, I'm just piecing this together. I'm going to skip a little section and just go towards the end here. Meal trains, play dates, and hand-me-downs are not proper substitutes for a society that provides affordable childcare, adequate wages, and time for leisure. But these patchwork solutions are precisely how many of us survive. We will always find ways to take care of one another. When we lean into this natural, unstoppable, and very human urge, the results are expansive. And I want more. I want more friends, more casual impromptu hangs, more dropping by with dinner, more walking and talking and advice sessions, more kids underfoot, more asking for and saying what we need, more hands to carry heavy boxes, more laughing and cackling and snorting, more children farting at the dinner table, more of what makes life messy, less painful, more sweet. I want to give and receive, to always be swapping Tupperware and food, all of us crowded together like curvy lumpen mangoes in a baking dish. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And now, thank you, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Sonora Jha. Yay. Sonora Jha, local legend here in Seattle, is the author of the recently released The Laughter, came out in February from Harper Via. Her memoir, How to Raise a Feminist Son, which everyone who gave birth to a male child should read, was published in the US, India, and Brazil in 2021, and her debut novel, Foreign, by Random House in India in 2013. After a career as a journalist covering crime, politics, and culture in India and Singapore, she moved to the United States to earn a PhD in media and public affairs. Dr. Jha is a professor of journalism at Seattle University, and she also teaches fiction and nonfiction for Hugo House, Hedgebrook, Creative Nonfiction, and the Seattle Public Library.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's so amazing to be here, and oh my goodness, this hall is definitely intimidating, but such a pleasure to be on this panel with all of you who come to writing about motherhood in these different but really important, exciting ways. So my journey to writing about motherhood was somewhat similar. That, you know, I started as a journalist in India and Singapore, and I resisted. I had to be, you know, it was such a male culture that we were told, like, you know, don't do like a women's thing, okay? Just like be like the guys. And I was totally buying into that and doing the stories that would be like the men and not, you know, leaning into any women's stories or the women's pages, women's issues. And so, but those were everything that we write about is a woman's issue, everything, right? And so much of it is about motherhood and caring and that part of the world, so that part of our existence. And so even with How to Raise a Feminist Son, I didn't come to that immediately, but I was writing a memoir. I knew it was kind of going to be a mother-son memoir, and I kept trying to think of like, what shape is this going to take? And realized that I was also writing, you know, the Me Too movement happened, and I was writing about different things that were happening in society and responding to those, and was writing about conversations with my son, who was a teenager then going to college, and those were the ones that were going viral, and people were responding. Women from India were writing to me, men were writing to me, young people were writing to me and saying like this, let's have these conversations. And that's when I realized that's what my memoir has to be about. And so it was How to Raise a Feminist Son, which is more about living a feminist life, living the life of a mother who is self-actualizing and not self-sacrificing. Yes. And of course, in Jasmine's book, like that can take very different consequences, but that's the scary thing, right? Like we're not told that we can do that, but what does it mean to do that, and what does it mean for feminism, and what does it mean for masculinity to do that? But I have a new book, which I'm promoting right now, and the way I come to this and motherhood is there's no mother in this book. I mean, not one of the main characters, but there's a woman in this book who chooses not to be a mother. And I think when we talk about this post-Roe v. Wade world, we have to talk about those who choose not to be mothers and yet do so much mothering, right? And are expected to do such mothering. So although this book, I chose to write it entirely from a white male English professor's point of view to expose whiteness and to expose white male supremacy. The character of Ruhaba Khan, who's this Pakistani law professor who this guy is obsessed with, she comes to the page in her emails and her letters that are sprinkled through the book. And so I picked this section, the short section that I'm going to read, where her sister who lives in France, and they're from Pakistan originally, and her sister sends her son, who got into some sort of trouble in France, she sends her to Ruhaba in the US to take care of him so that he can cool his heels a little bit, right? And to me, that is such an interesting thing where we impose motherhood or we impose aunthood on women because that's just expected. So she's been estranged from her family, but they will tap her when they need this help, right? So she, and yet she does come through and she writes this letter to her sister about her bond with this boy. Dear Saira, I'm worried about Adil and his future. He's such a loving boy, your son. He and I have built an immense bond these past few weeks. He's a free thinker, a gentle soul, a feminist, and a flutist. Please call me from your friend's phone soon so I can discuss with you a proposition about his further education. This child has broken a spell. I always believed I could never tell a soul in our family, except you, what happened to me that made me mistrust men, especially those from our world. But I hadn't known then that there was this greater family to come. I hadn't known that one day a child named Adil would be my family. This child with the same color of skin and hair and eye as my worst oppressors would sleep soundly in a room in my home, and I would feel safe. No whisper from the past could have willed in me the comfort, no, raging hope that I feel when I hear Adil play his flute in his room. Adil. Does your name mean anything? People ask him and me. Yes, it means something. It means the one who is just. A boy whose name means just comes to live with an aunt who seeks justice, whose name means open. I hope you will forgive me, but he found me sobbing yesterday from the stress of a photograph of me that someone leaked on campus. I perhaps should not have done this, but I opened up to this teenager and told him about my past. I told him about the men who didn't save me, the men who didn't stand up for me, the men who were charged with protecting me but didn't, from the family men. I told Adil who they were and how very unlike them he was now, and how very unlike them he was forever to be. Adil swore to me never to speak of it. He was shaken when I told him that child the color of those men, so shaken that I was racked with self-doubt for a moment. But then, how else will we turn our boys into good men? How will we find in them the masculinity that melts into tears of compassion, of a right rage? Adil had tears in his eyes. Adil cried tears for me, for the girl I was, for the girlhood I lost. I made a Pakistani boy cry for me. I am invincible. He is brave, your brave son. I am happy you found another way to escape our home, different from my way. I know you feel loved and cherished by the sweet family you made. I will find a way to keep Adil here for as long as you want. I will come with him to Toulouse next summer and hug you and my brother-in-law and Naima. I will have you all as my family, and I will have Adil. He will keep his friends here. He will grow radical with me. Thank you. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Jasmine, whose book is mind-blowing and just incredible, and I cannot believe it's your first book. I'm so jealous. So Jasmine Chan's short stories have appeared in Tin House and Epoch. A former reviews editor at Publishers Weekly, she holds an MFA from Columbia University. Her first novel, The School for Good Mothers, is a New York Times bestseller and a Read with Jenna Today Show book club pick. She lives in Chicago with her husband and daughter. And I have to say that we sent these bios of ours in a few months ago, and since then so much has happened for Jasmine's book that is incredible to watch and follow. So congratulations, and take it away.
Great. Thank you all for coming out for a morning event, and thanks to Hugo House for inviting me to join this incredible panel. It's really an honor to share the stage with all of you, and I admire your work so much. So I'm the author of The School for Good Mothers, which came out in hardcover last January and just came out in paperback, and it's so much lighter to carry to events now. So the book really came out of two threads of inspiration. So it's about Frida Liu, a Chinese-American single mom who loses custody of her toddler daughter, Harriet, after having one very bad day. And in order to get her daughter back, she has to spend a year at a newly created government institution where she's re-educated with moms from around the county whose transgressions range from benign to horrific. So readers are following not just Frida's journey to get her daughter back, but also her struggle to hold on to her integrity while she's being indoctrinated by the state. So the book really grew out of both a personal well of inspiration, but also an important article that I read. So in 2014, which Angela pointed out just last night at our event, that this is almost 10 years ago now, which is kind of terrifying to think about. So I started the book in early 2014, and around that time I was heading into my late 30s, and it was time to make a decision about having a baby. And I did not feel ready in any way. My husband did not feel ready in any way. We spent many years ruminating on the subject of whether or not to have a child. So I was already thinking a lot about motherhood and feeling the time pressure bearing down on me. So I already had that subject on the brain, and around that time, I happened to read an article in the New Yorker called "Where Is Your Mother" by the journalist Rachel Aviv, and that came out in late 2013, and that's about a single mom who loses custody of her toddler son after leaving him home alone, and the neighbors hear him crying and call the police, and after that day, she never gets him back. And something about that story just really planted a seed of rage in my mind. I was so angry on that mother's behalf, and the way that all the representatives of the government, the social workers, the family court judge, the lawyers talked to that mother, and the way they spoke about parenting reminded me almost of science fiction. So however the stew of imagination works, those forces combined in terms of coming up with the world of the school and a Frida and Harriet story. So to avoid spoilers, I'm just going to read from the first 2 pages. We have your daughter. It's the first Tuesday in September, the afternoon of her one very bad day, and Frida is trying to stay on the road. On the voicemail, the officer tells her to come to the station immediately. She pauses the message, puts down her phone. It's 2:46 p.m. She meant to get home an hour and a half ago. She pulls onto the first side street off Grace Ferry and double parks. She calls back and begins apologizing, explaining that she lost track of time. Is she okay? The officer says the child is safe. Ma'am, we've been trying to reach you. Frida hangs up and calls Gus, has to leave a message. He needs to meet her at the station at 11th and Wharton. There's a problem. It's Harriet. Her voice catches. She repeats the officer's promise that their daughter is safe. As she begins driving again, she reminds herself to stay under the speed limit, to avoid running red lights, to breathe. All through Labor Day weekend, she felt frantic. Last Friday and Saturday, she had her usual insomnia, sleeping 2 hours each night. On Sunday, when Gus dropped off Harriet for Frida's 3.5 days of custody, Harriet was in the throes of an ear infection. That night, Frida slept 90 minutes. Last night, an hour. Harriet's crying has been relentless, too big for her body, too loud for the walls of their tiny house to absorb. Frida did what she could. She sang lullabies, rubbed Harriet's chest, gave her extra milk. She laid on the floor next to Harriet's crib, held her impossibly perfect hand to the bars, kissed her knuckles, her fingernails, feeling for the ones that needed to be trimmed, praying for Harriet's eyes to close. The afternoon sun is burning as Frida pulls up to the station, located 2 blocks from her house in an old Italian neighborhood in South Philly. She parks and rushes to the reception desk, asks if the receptionist has seen her daughter, a toddler, 18 months old, half Chinese, half white, big brown eyes, curly dark brown hair with bangs. You must be the mother, the receptionist says. Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Claire Dederer. Claire Dederer is the best-selling author of 2 acclaimed memoirs, Love and Trouble and Poser. Her new nonfiction book, Monsters, is based on her viral Paris Review essay, What Do We Do with the Art of Monstrous Men? Monsters will be published by Knopf in April 2023. Claire's writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Nation, Vogue, Slate, and many other publications. She is the recipient of a Lannan Foundation residency and is currently on the faculty of the Creative Writing MFA at Pacific University. Welcome, Claire Dederer.
Thank you. Thanks. Hi, everyone, again. Motherhood has really been crucial to all of my books. I think Poser, my first book, it was a memoir, but it was also a satire in a way of the idea of the perfectibility of motherhood. And the second book, Love and Trouble, was about being predated as a girl in the 1970s and then how the predation shaped my own sexuality. And in writing about sexuality, I was really very consciously in that book pushing against the ideal of the mother and the limitations of motherhood narratives, right? So even in moments where motherhood wasn't present in Love and Trouble, it was very present in the writing, and it was very present in the publication, where the first question was from the audience or the book group was always, what did your children think? So the new book, Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma, explores the question, as Jasmine said, what do we do with the art of monstrous men? But it also asks who gets to make art, who is expected to nurture, and it deals with the ways that motherhood and nurturing can impinge on a woman's artistic freedom and productivity. And I think this is a post-Roe question, right? I think Roe enables us to do our work, or enabled, I'm sad to use that past tense. We need to be able to choose our lives. Today for this panel, I'm going to echo a couple of things that have been touched on and go a little further and interrogate the fallacious idea that nurturing belongs to women. I want to question the model that lays the problem of care at the feet of women who don't always want it. And even as we're choosing to be mothers or not to be mothers, care is important, care is crucial. We have to preserve women's freedoms. At the same time, we have to broaden the idea of who is expected to care. So I'm going to read a short excerpt from my book on that subject. And are there any Wrinkle in Time fans out there? Yeah, okay. All right, so how does a mother balance the great project of her art with the great project of taking care of children? I stumbled on a new way of thinking about this problem when I recently reread Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time. Toward the end of the book, the heroine Meg, battered by adversity, ends up on the gray, grim planet Camazotz, I'm guessing pronunciation. She is approached by a trio of monsters. They had 4 arms and far more than 5 fingers to each hand, and the fingers were not fingers, but long waving tentacles. Meg is swooped up by a tentacled monster, but instead of getting squeezed to death, she is surrounded by comfort and warmth. Lying there, cradled in the 4 strange arms, Meg, despite herself, felt a sense of security that was deeper than anything she had known since the days when she lay in her mother's arms in the old rocking chair and was sung to sleep. The care Meg receives from the beast is remarkable. "Lie still, small one," says the monster. "You must not exert yourself as yet. You must not try to feed yourself. You must be as an infant again." When I read the book as a child, I hadn't even clocked this character. Now it seemed to me the most important character, the most important moment in the book. This is a radical image to me, the image of a monster of care, a mother monster. Our idea of who can and should nurture is tragically narrow. It's easy to forget, but the problem of childcare is not an inherently female problem once breastfeeding has passed. And yet there's an essentialist response to the problem of childcare. That is, it is assumed that if you are the female parent, it's your problem. Nurturing is your job, like it or not. Mostly I like it, but it's time consuming, or it was. Now my children are grown and no longer need so many hours from me. From this vantage, I feel sort of amazed by how trapped and lonely I was in my role of nurturer, which relates to what you were reading about, creating these communities of care. How totally I and the people around me believed it was my sole job because of my gender. This was not, I repeat, a biological necessity. If, as Simone de Beauvoir said, a woman is not born but made, this was what made me a woman, this entrapment, this unquestioned assumption of my nurturing. When I read de Beauvoir as a girl, I thought she meant something shallower. I thought she meant that I was made a woman by the skirt I wore or the slash of red lipstick. But now I know I was made into a woman by the demands of motherhood, by the inexorable expectation that I was the nurturer in chief. A few years ago, I saw Steve McQueen's film Widows about a gang of women who pull off a heist. Has anyone seen this?
Yeah.
So good. Mm-hmm. A surprising amount of the film is devoted to how the women find babysitters for the night of the heist. I loved that. I thought to myself, this is a film about childcare disguised as a heist movie. But really, why aren't all heist movies about childcare? Why don't we know about the babysitters hired by Danny Ocean? Did the Reservoir Dogs use a daycare? Did Kaiser Soze call his mom to ask for her help with the kids? Male narratives repeatedly pretend childcare does not exist, because for men, it often hasn't. But does it need to be that way? What we think of as the female brain, with its endless lists, its sorting of relationships and tasks, its patience, attention to detail, empathy, those are Doris Lessing's words, is not really a female brain per se. It is a nurturing brain. It's not inherently gendered. So when we ask how mothers balance their art with their mothering, what we're really asking is how nurturing, a non-gendered attribute, can be balanced with selfness, a non-gendered attribute. The question of how to balance nurturing with art making isn't really a mother question. It's a person question disguised as a mother question.
Yes.
This is why the story of the mother artist must be written over and over again, and at length. The mother is a stand-in for the part in all of us that is concerned with other people, that wants to care about other people. The mother is the ultimate symbol of caring. In the artist-mother balance, that is to say, the self-nurturer balance, we have to figure out how to wrest more time for our art, sure. But we also have to expand our idea of who nurtures and who is expected to nurture. Back on planet Camazotz, Meg doesn't know what to call this genderless, ultra-loving monster. She casts about and comes up with aunt or aunt, which connects back to what Sonora was reading. The creature replies, aunt, maybe, yes, perhaps that will do. And you think of such odd words about me, thing and monster. Monster, what a horrid sort of I really do not think I am a monster. Beast, that will do. Aunt Beast. The scene goes on. Aunt Beast, Meg murmured sleepily and laughed. Have I said something funny? Aunt Beast asked in surprise. Isn't Aunt Beast all right? Aunt Beast is lovely, Meg said. Please sing to me, Aunt Beast. This is a monster who nurtures. This monster cooks and cuddles and sings. She makes and she loves. It makes and it loves. Aunt Beast is a fantastical model of how we all, women, men, everyone, might be. So I'll wrap up there. Right on. So I'm charged with opening the discussion, and I think you've started to answer this question, but I'll just sort of ask it more generally. How has having children radicalized you? And anybody is welcome to jump in.
I'll jump in and just say that, I will completely cop to like progressive, radical politics, like, eat the rich, burn the state, redistribute wealth, all of that. But becoming a mother, like at a physical, like cellular level, it just made it all real. Jasmine and I were talking last night where she was saying how before I gave so little thought to care work. I saw my mom work full time, but then also be responsible for dinner. She cleaned the house, and I was not told that's what I had to do, but I sort of internalized that.
Yeah.
And I have two daughters, or as of now, they're two daughters, and I felt so clearly, like, I don't know, it just made it so real, where I realized too, like my parenting work there's so many things that I want for our society, right? Like, I would start with basic human rights, such as bodily autonomy, healthcare, affordable childcare, family leave, right? But an end to white supremacy, misogyny, all of those things. And I think I always felt a little bit like maybe those things, I could work towards those things, and I truly don't know if those things will happen in my lifetime. But having children radicalized me further and recommitted me to the project of fighting for those things and naming those things, and not being complicit in the perpetuation of those things, because I felt like, well, it's legacy work, right? Like this is I can help contribute in my way to making the world a better place. It's not about me. If I don't live to see these things, right? Like this idea of like, the what is it, the arc, the moral arc of the universe that King said, like, bends towards justice, right? Like, it's a long
Yeah, it's
right? Like, it takes time. Like, all movement work, like, takes so much longer. It's really inefficient. It's human-centered, right? Anyway, I just started to feel like I need to recommit myself and figure out how this shows up in my daily life and how I model this for my daughters, because maybe these things that I want won't happen while I am alive, but they may happen in their lifetime, and my children could be part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, similar to your story, I think, I write about this in How to Raise a Feminist Son, that I really, really wanted to have a daughter and believed I would have daughters. And so when I found out I was having a son, I burst into tears. And actually, in India, having a son is what makes you a good woman, right? Worthy and all of that. And so there was celebration, and I was like, shut up, I'm crying, like, I'm not celebrating this, I don't know what to do, because I had a lot of violent men in my childhood, my father, my brother, and I thought that was endemic to men, like that is how they are. And so I was afraid, even when I held my boy baby, and we gendered him as boy then, I was afraid. I was afraid that this thing was going to grow up and beat me. Like I actually thought that this thing will grow up into this violent person and be violent toward me and other women. And, of course there was a logical thing, like, no, that's not going to happen, but it was so visceral for me. So I had to commit myself to raising a soft, gentle, tender-hearted son, and it was a survival thing. And so I got really committed to being a radical person. I already was as a journalist, but then it became personal, right? And so looking at all the ways that the world had to be a better place so that he could be a good man and a good human being. And so finding different ways of doing that and removing him from those influences that were around us and bring him and making the choice to live in America, even though this was a harder life for me than my life in India. And then, divorcing and marrying and divorcing 2 men, and just like everything became about that enterprise almost, And so I stay committed to it, and then learning so much about masculinity from the way he was being, and seeing all the things that happened in my life through that lens, that now I love this boy, right? What do? I love this boy. And so I have to understand masculinity, and I have to understand the influences on him, and how it's almost like a body snatching thing, that there will be influences that will take this boy into another world, and I'm not going to be able to be his primary influence. There's this movie, Little Nicky, and I absolutely love that mother in that movie because she's like, I invented electricity. Like she tells him that she is everything, and he grows up believing that. And so anyway, it became a joke with my son and me that your mother is everything, okay? So anyway, so I had to be radical, and as I said earlier, that as a single mom especially, I had to be self-actualizing, constantly talking about what my next dream was, so that he believed that women will continue to have dreams and he will champion those dreams for other women. So I believe he's doing that in the world right now, although there is days when maybe he's not being as much of a feminist as I would like, but it's a constant struggle. So that's how I've become much more radical for that reason, and now he pushes me to be more radical in so many ways, and that's the best thing, you know.
Well, to piggyback on what Angela mentioned already, so it's a little bit terrifying to admit this in public, but I actually did not think about childcare concerns at all before having a child myself. And partly that's because I grew up in a Chinese immigrant family, and we always had one grandmother or another grandmother, sometimes all the grandparents living with us. At one point, it was my dad's mom, my mom's parents, my mom's sister, plus our nuclear family. So I didn't ever watch my parents scramble for childcare. My grandmother was the one who took us to school, who was with us for sick days, and my parents both worked full time, and it seemed very possible. And I don't think that I ever thought about what the struggle would be like to have both a career and a child, because the model that I was shown was more of a community model instead of the American everyone fends for yourself model. So I think becoming a mother really opened up the range of concerns that were suddenly part of my life. And also I think because the subject of my book ended up becoming more of a critique of the child welfare system, I never would have guessed that that's what my first book would have been about. And certainly none of my previous work had a political bent at all. But I think once I started reading about it, I think it was shocking to me that it's not on the front page of the papers every single day, and that the fact that the government takes thousands of children away from their parents every year all around us, and that it primarily happens to Black and brown women who are poor. The fact that that just continues year after year, to me felt really terrifying. And it's something that I hope that readers of my book want to learn more about. And certainly I think my book raises questions more than offering answers, but it's a set of concerns that I wouldn't have predicted like 10 or 12 years ago in the previous iteration of my writing life. But now that I'm thinking about moms and families, I don't know that I can ever leave that behind completely. It's one thing that, because a lot of my friends know that I was, that my book was kind of born out of my ambivalence about being a mom, what the advice I've given everyone is that when you become a mom, you're never going to have the same time again, but you're going to have material for the rest of your life. So your time will never be your own, but suddenly there's this fount of inspiration.
That's great.
I mean, I want to hear, what about you?
It's
your question, so
I know. I better have a good answer. I think for me, I kind of touched on this in what I read, this idea of being locked into place by my role was really radicalizing to me, or not at first. At first, I was just really mad. And there's this really incredible, I don't know if people read The Golden Notebook anymore by Doris Lessing. I mentioned her earlier. The book, she writes both about like motherhood and feminism, but the book is really about trying to be a communist, i.e. trying to make the world better. And one of the things she gets at is that when you're a young mother and you have this experience of being locked into being the carer, if you have bad luck, you take it personally and think it's just about you. And what good luck looks like is understanding that you're part of a system. And like that was really beautiful to me, this idea that good luck is to get the political ramifications of your own experience. And I think that I didn't have that good luck at first, but I did after a while. I started to understand that I was part of this larger, this larger system of problems. And I think the other thing, so that feeling of being trapped and what I did with it is what radicalized me. And then Sonora and I have talked recently about having children, I think our kids are older than you guys is, and to have kids who are in their 20s, as we've gone through the experiences of the last 5 years, has been incredible. I mean, our children are so politically radical, and I'm so grateful that I'm not one of those people who's sitting around being grumpy about the next thing. I mean, I think that part of the radicalization of motherhood has been really surprising to me, that it leaves the door open to new ideas in a way I didn't expect, and I really love.
I was going to say, like, I loved the passage that you read, specifically naming this as, like, this is not a female problem. Like, this is a human problem, right? So this is a post-Roe. Jasmine pointed out last night, like, you could argue there was a need for it, but this panel didn't exist last year, like, as a title, right?
Yeah.
Like, writing motherhood in the post-Roe world. But, I mean, this is a human problem. And I think there's something to the point of radicalization where it's radicalized me not just as a mother or as a parent. It is when you start to clue into those systems, right? When you become aware you cannot look away. And to me, it's built more solidarity for me with everyone. Anyone who is oppressed, right? Anyone who is mistreated and abused within our systems of power, which is most of us. And I think that, it created an opportunity for me to also, it was very expansive radicalization, where I see things well beyond, like, the problems of my nuclear family and my community. Like, it's made me so much more aware of everything.
Yeah, I think that brings up an interesting question that relates to, I know I already asked a question, but this idea of when we're confronted with this kind of injustice or just really bad idea of defeating Roe, is it something that you channel that anger and that understanding, that systemic understanding? Does it go into your writing, or is there a way that at a certain point you turn away from writing and you turn toward action? Or do those two things coexist? I'm curious. I mean, I think about this all the time. Yeah.
I can speak a little bit to that because writing is action, and I have to remind myself that, when I go into a protest or something, and I feel like, oh, I'm not doing enough, or someone says, hey, you got to be at this thing, and you got to be at that thing. You're not doing, you need to sign this, you need to show up physically to all these different things. And I think too, because we think of all these issues as women's issues, women feel like we have to keep showing up in different places. Right. And one of the things that happened with the pandemic, right, was when everything quieted down, I was just like, I have all this time, which as a woman, it's like performing womanhood makes you feel like you have to be there for your community, you have to be there for your friends, you have to go to the gym, do all these things. But writing is a radical act, and writing about certain issues, or whether you're just writing about joy and not about any issue in particular, right? Yeah. That is itself. So it's a reminder to myself that you can say no to marching in the streets, or I do go marching in the streets, but other things, right? That you feel like you're somehow failing the cause, right? Because you're not doing everything. My son keeps reminding me, are you talking about income inequality enough? And I was like, yes, that too, right? Like,
that's my son.
Right? So all the intersections, right? We're doing a lot, and there are times when we will have to, like new mothers, for instance, we'll have the stress of like, oh gosh, I'm falling behind in my career, or I'm not doing this, and I'm not showing up to that thing. And you have to just give everyone a hug and say, calm down, you are doing in this moment what you're supposed to do, right? So I think that is a reminder to us that writing itself is a radical act, whether you write about this or that. And to that end, I also thought, I was really thrilled in Jasmine's book, very quickly from the mothering piece, we get into this this sex scene. And I was just like, I was thinking of her as this mother, and it was interesting, right? My response that we've gone from this fraught mother, and it was such a great choice to do that, to immediately put this thing of her very strong sexuality. And in this book too, this woman has this monstrous sexuality, right? Like, so writing about mothers or aunts or these women as hugely sexual beings is also radical writing. And I think writing about any aspect of that kind of womanhood.
I want to say that I did an event with Jasmine last night at Third Place Books, and I explicitly asked her about sex because I was like, whoo, this book, it takes us right there, which is also, especially as Asian women, is not often represented. And as I said last night, I was like, spoiler alert, many people come to motherhood for sex. And so this idea that mothers are not inherently beasts, right? Or animals is really, that's a massive erasure, I think it's a hugely important component.
Was that hard to write, Jasmine?
Oh, I think the work that all of us are doing, what you're saying, Sonora, about making art being a radical act. I think any representations of moms, especially, that are fully dimensional, where moms get to be flawed and selfish and desirous and confused and to make the wrong choices and make mistakes, is hopefully expanding art and the world in some small way. And I didn't grow up seeing representations like that on the page. It's certainly not women of color, certainly not moms of color. And so I think by offering female characters that do have more nuance, that hopefully deepens the conversation in some way. But I will say those scenes were fun to write. But I thought that was an important part of the book, because I didn't want the character to be an innocent. And I wanted her to be complicated, and I wanted her to not be a perfect heroine. She's more of an anti-heroine, and that is much more in line with what I wanted to do with the novel.
I want to ask one of my questions, if that's okay, to make this shift. Because, the title of the panel is interesting, and it's attention grabbing, which is how do you write about motherhood post-Roe? And my thought initially when I read that was we haven't, this isn't a surprise, right? We have seen like abortion activists can tell you, like we have seen the fall of Roe coming for years. It was like in every couple of years, the Supreme Court would do something and we'd all go out into the street and make 1 million donations to Planned Parenthood, and abortion funds, which is great, but then we kind of would like sit back and wait for the next thing to happen. Like this has been a systematic dismantling of our rights. And so I think now it touches everyone, and it's so violent is the thing that I'm always struck by, forcing people into motherhood, forcing people into these births, like it's state violence. But the thing that I wondered about is like we've known like abortion has actually been very inaccessible for pregnant people, in rural areas in the South, especially if you're a person of color. And so to what extent, I feel like I have been writing pre-fall of Roe America is not that different to me in my mind, or it wasn't, right? Like, than post-Roe. And so I'm curious, like, how do you think that's coming up for you in your work, or how do you imagine, or was that something that you were dealing with consciously?
I'm going to jump in here because I attempted to write a post-Roe story. So I happened to be at a gift from the gods a couple weeks at an artist residency when Roe was overturned, and all of us who were there just went into a state of just collective mourning. And I ended up trying to channel that into fiction and trying to write somewhat of a dystopian story taking place in a world that's a little worse than ours. But I found that I couldn't imagine the world that would be a little worse than ours in terms of the invasion of privacy and the surveillance and the feeling of all these women being hunted. It's hard to imagine a fictional world that would achieve the terror of life in America right now. So I haven't yet figured a way into that. So, it might be the case that we don't necessarily see what writing post-Roe looks like for a couple of years. Because it takes a long time to just both live with the horrors of right now and then figure out how to turn that into art.
That's so interesting, the problem of the dystopian novelist in this moment. And how do you go farther? It's really challenging. I have nothing to say except, wow, that sounds hard.
I decided to just put that away for a little while.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I had this question. I find it difficult to deal with that too, even though to some extent, being a journalist, I'm definitely very engaged in stories, and everything I've written comes from a news story. And what's going on in the news. But some of these things have just felt so debilitating and so overwhelming. And I think coming out of the pandemic and going into this situation with Roe is just it's felt very heavy. So you're right, whether you're writing about it as a political essay or you're writing it in fiction, it's feeling like it's hard to put the words together, and I know that people want to talk about it and feel it, but I think we're just going to have to go through a period where we just feel everything, and then the words start to come. So I'm hopeful that that's something that happens, whether it comes in a direct writing about Roe or writing around it, And for me, writing about masculinity and what's the role of men in this situation, because spoiler alert, men might have something to do with pregnancies. So I think so for me, that's the thing. And I have a question too about, for me, growing up in India, motherhood was definitely a thing you were going to do, so I try to think about would I have chosen marriage and motherhood if I didn't think that was the norm, right? And I know it's true all over the world, but I didn't have any examples of women, maybe one or two, and I would be fascinated, whoa, you don't have kids? How does that feel, you poor thing? I had totally bought into this thing that being a woman meant you got married at a certain age, and you got married at 23, was check, doing all the right things, right? Until those right things sort of turned on me, So I think now I've started to think about the choices of not being mothers, right? I've always been supportive of that, but I'm thinking about whether that would have been a choice for me. And it's hard to do that when you have this human being who's your child roaming the world. You don't, you know. But what is how does our writing expand into expand the choices or expand that conversation about non-motherhood or a rejection of motherhood or mothering? You know, like the character in this book could have said, "F you, I don't want to be host your child," right? How do we expand into that as well? And yeah, we're all doing it in some ways, but
Yeah, I mean, one thing that comes up for me is thinking about how, you know, in the way that, you know, I grew up in the, you know, I'm a Gen X, I'm 45, and so I grew up in the conversation around abortion was very like pro-choice, pro-life, and now I'm like, wow, that was an extremely limited way of seeing things, right? And to go back again, I'm just gonna hit this bell over and over, like this is a human issue, right? Like this is not a female issue, and so I think about it as like we're talking about human rights, and so I think the frame of everything we should be talking about in mothering, nurturing, caring is a reproductive justice framework, which was created by Black women, and this is really the idea that everyone should have the right to have a family or not have a family, to raise their children in safe environments, right? It is much more of like a public health sort of thing, not an individual choice. Yeah. And I think that I don't know, like, and I think about this character who in, you know, Post-Roe was like, she's not necessarily not. She's a mother not by violence and not by choice.
Right.
But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because I feel like, I think all of us are committed to like not veering into like this is like women's territory, but I think really like once I started really learning and reading about reproductive justice, you know, Loretta Ross has a great book about this. It's a great way to think of it more expansively about communities, about something beyond individuals, and something much more beyond pregnancy and abortion.
Yeah, I think I jump off in a similar way. I think it's, you know, just having finished writing a book kind of as Roe was struck down, and the book started out from a really kind of strong liberal feminist point of view, and it expanded there into a more of an exploration of larger power structures. And I think about Roe a lot in terms of bodily autonomy, because I feel like it's not an accident that, you know, trans rights and Roe are being attacked at the same time. Yeah. And it has to do with this kind of organized diminishment and violence of people's freedoms, except for one specific group who are going to have all freedoms, apparently. So just to echo what you're saying and to talk about like expanding it from reproductive health and then even further into just being in charge of your own body, which is, again, a human issue. Yeah. Anyway.
I'm going to jump in with one of my questions.
Yes, please.
So, given the world we live in with the overturning of Roe, with the climate crisis and gun violence and systemic injustice and the ongoing pandemic, and the ever-present feeling that our society is falling apart, how do you maintain hope while writing and while parenting?
You want to talk about hope first?
Sure. I mean, I'll talk about hope. I actually I was surprised at how often I got a question similar to this about hope when I was on tour last year. And I mean, I want to say that like things are objectively really bad right now. Like we're in a unique unprecedented, right, is the word that we use all the time. But I mean, people have lived through colonization and forced sterilizations, and people have lived through enslavement. Like, it's not like things haven't been bad it's always been really bad for people, some group of people at some point. Now I think we're just all more affected by it, and we're all more aware of that. And there's pain that comes with that every day. And so I think that it's important to recognize that. But I did a talk like last month that I met with these undergraduates at Duke University, and I wasn't sure how that was going to go, and I left being like, wow, young people are so great, you know? But this one young man asked me, you know, like, how do you stay hopeful? It seems like everything you're writing about and working on is like kind of a dead end. And I was like, dude, okay. And I was just like, what a privilege What a privilege to give up on hope. What a fucking privilege. Sorry, I'm not supposed, I think it's being live streamed. Like, what a privilege to feel hopeless. You know, the activist and abolitionist and writer Mariam Kaba said, hope is a discipline. And I think that that's what I come back to all the time.
Yeah.
Like, I'm only here because some, like my ancestors, like found a way to survive, right? Like, and that's hope. Through hope, you know, there's no way, like, and joy, right? Like, that's really important. I just think, like, you can feel the pain of the world and still get your life and still be hopeful because it's a thing that you have to practice at. I mean, people before me who didn't have indoor plumbing, right? Like, nobody gave up, right? Who had, like, the plague, right? Like, they didn't give up, so I'm not going to. I'm not going to lose hope. No.
Yes, that's beautiful. For me, I think hope has always been a coping mechanism. That if I don't hope, everything is lost. You know, I won't write, I won't wake up in the morning, I won't blah, blah, blah. But having said that, I did give myself a time to despair, and I used that privilege of letting go of hope, you know. And just like felt, like I felt the despair of all kinds of things, you know, when around 50 and, you know, a couple of years after 50, I just let myself feel it and feel everything. And so knowing that I was going to default to hope eventually, you know. So
I feel like you can free fall if you're like, I know what the bottom is.
Right,
It's hope,
exactly.
right?
The bottom is hope, right? And it is, you're right, being around young people, you know, seeing that my son, even while he's saying, we're all going to get cooked, my children are going to get cooked, Mama, what are we doing about that? And I was like, oh my God, like, wait, now we're talking about climate change. Which one today, right? So knowing that he gets out in the world and works for, you know, he organized protests in LA for Roe, and, you know, he was like, is anyone going to come? And I said, people are going to show up. People are angry. They're going to show up. And they did, right? And he was like, the posters are ready and everything. So that hope with which he and his friends were organizing around this issue, that gives me hope. And being around my students, you know, and the way they are, like, they don't have to figure out, like, okay, you know, someone's, transitioning their gender, they're on board, you know, and it doesn't feel to them like, oh, we're good people, so we're doing this. There's a seamlessness to their empathy, and to watch that, and that their muscle of empathy is so well developed that it's so seamless, that gives me a lot of hope, because it's like, this is great, like, and being among them and listening to them talk about things, that gives me a lot of hope. So,
Yeah. I love that idea of the seamless empathy that I observe in the young. I'm thinking about your idea of when you're falling and you know you're going to stop at some point. And I think there's a thing that some people call mother suicide, which is when you're really, really depressed and feeling like you're not sure you want to go on, but you can't kill yourself because you have kids. And so I think there's this way that just having kids creates that stop for the fall, because you know you need to be there for someone else. But even more than that, and I don't mean to sound super smarmy, but I'm going to, when I was in a really severe depression in my 40s, it really was care that kept me going. Just having to go do the physical work of care, and having that as something that was this just like, sorry for this word, but this huge blessing on my life to have to get up and do the work. And so I think that just the very existence of my children is something that demands that I do the labor that supports the future, that's sort of part of the algebra of hope, right? Like I'm moving forward. And I think for me, the moving, I think I'm just realizing this while we're talking, I feel like one of the big experiences for me over the last 10 years is, I brought up this idea earlier of bad luck and good luck. And I think at the beginning, you know, in 2010 or something, I was much more in that space of thinking that my bad luck was personal. And over the last, 10 or 12 years, I've had the good fortune to see that it's part of a larger problem. And that is oppressive and horrifying, but it's also good luck to be able to see, and to know, okay, well, now what am I going to do? So that wasn't the most cheerful answer, but
No,
I know it was your question, but I don't think that means you don't get to answer it.
yeah. It's all you
I
know.
asked the question because I get this question at
Yeah.
events too, and because I tend to be in a number of dystopian novel panels, so the subject comes up. And I mean, when you were talking just now, I was thinking that what I did during the lockdown was revise my book, and so I was about 2 weeks into the developmental edits with my first editor at Simon & Schuster when the lockdown happened, and I felt like I had to have a talk with myself every day to say that writing this book matters, making art matters. It's okay that we hired one of her teachers to be our nanny, that it's okay that I'm using some of my book money to have childcare, even though so many people don't have childcare right now. And so I had to keep telling myself that it's okay that I have these privileges and I'm using them in this way, even though I'm not volunteering, even though I might not have donated as much as I wanted to, and to believe that art and beauty and literature have some importance in people's lives, even though it's not the same as volunteering at a soup kitchen or doing community activism. And so I felt like I was having this conversation with myself all the time to tell myself that yes, the writing of books is meaningful work in that way and important.
Ooh, can I jump in on that? That's so exciting to me. So one of the things I'm dealing with in the book I'm just publishing has to do, it's this sort of calculus of somebody does something terrible and they write or make a great film or they make a really incredible piece of art. And it's, on the one hand, we have a lot of language to talk about the morality around the behavior, but we have a harder time talking about about beauty and about the love we have for the work, and it's really nourishing and important. So I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years really thinking about that relationship I have with art and how important it is and how hard it is to put into words. But that's also a source of hope, I agree. Yeah.
I mean, I think that the system is set up so that we're in crisis mode all the time. We're all functioning with very high cortisol levels, and it's not a great state to be in, and we haven't been given public opportunities to grieve. So, just to say, I see you all. It's not okay what we're living through, right? But of course, art is so important. It's essential, right? Remember, people used to be patrons of the arts, literally have you in their court, right? And I think about how now the system is designed so that we're managing all of these fires and everything feels urgent and we should be doing more.
Right.
And all of it is the distraction from living whole lives, being the idea that the point of life might be having an experience, reading a poem, writing a poem, taking a walk. We all think we're supposed to be doing something more and something better than that. And I reject that. But it doesn't mean that, you can't, that there is that need to feel like you're doing stuff, because there is a need to have some sort of activism or service or some way of addressing the problems that we have. And I mean, I think that also I'd like to tie that to caregiving and beauty and what you were saying earlier, the idea of getting up and doing the work. There's something really beautiful in work.
Yeah.
That the work of being a human, it is keeping yourself alive and well and caring for your people. That is real work. It's the only real work that matters in life. I said this yesterday, I'll say it again, we invented money. we could not believe in money, right? Mm-hmm. We could be having gardens, but instead we have credit card debt, and I feel like the work of care is something that gives me hope. I find care work, and I'd love to sort of talk about this because it's very gendered, and sometimes I feel a little hesitant to say this, but I derive such physical pleasure from, when I'm not forced into doing it all the time, but I love touch. I love the smell of people, right? I love caring for my little humans, right? My parents are older now. I do a lot of labor for them. I love rolling logs and chopping wood for them. That care work is wonderful in many ways. And I don't think we talk about the pleasure and the how essential it is to living anything close to a full life.
Yeah, I agree.
If anyone wants to jump on that.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that goes back to the idea of choice, right? You know, this idea that the relationship between what you get to choose to do, or, you know, in terms of, and at the same time, there's like some of those things are not choices. Like, I guess you can choose not to take care of your parents, but the post-Roe moment of having your choices narrow,
Yeah.
so that you're not necessarily doing that because you chose to. Yeah. But I love the idea of art as a thing that takes us out of the kind of commodification of time and the fetish of busyness.
Yeah.
Like, art can be this portal away from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, as we're all like, but please buy our books, and please buy our books.
That gives me hope, yeah.
But don't you feel like it's a conversation that you have to fight against what the culture is telling you, that the making of art is not important? Also, like growing up in immigrant families,
Yeah.
to convince our families that this is an okay life that I'm
Yes,
pursuing.
yes.
And also it is work that takes us away from our children, that requires us to be alone. And so I've had to continually tell myself that, like, this is a valid thing to do, this is a job, and it's okay that I'm using my childcare hours in this way. And I feel like I have to eliminate the voices that I've taken in for 4 decades.
Yeah, I don't want to make it seem at all like I've just arrived at this place and it's like easy breezy for me. Like, I'm talking to myself every day about it. Like, that's an active unlearning. But I want to like promote that idea, because it takes work to get there, but it's for sure. Like, the call is coming. It's coming from outside, but the call is coming from inside the house as well. And so it is. But I don't know. I feel like that's the fight I want to be in. Like, if it's a fight with myself, right? Or like a gentle dialogue, pushing and constantly growing in that way.
A navigation, I call it.
Ah, yeah.
I mean, just today I had to, and it doesn't just to you that have younger kids. It doesn't end, by the way. There's always something going on. Like today, I literally, before coming up here, I was texting my son because he's having some crisis, and I said, okay, I can't talk now, okay? Just like manage your thing, because I have to go talk about motherhood. So it's fine.
That's perfect. Do you have works that you turn to that have inspired you to think about this stuff, or, you know, people who've gone before us who've written on this, or people you turn to?
Well, I mean, I turn to all of you now.
I know, exactly.
And one book that just came out in December, which is incredible, is Screaming on the Inside, The Unsustainability of American Motherhood by Jessica Gross. And I was amazed when I asked for a galley, she shortened the title to just Screaming. Like, could you send her a galley of Screaming? And that really just, I think, captures the book. And it's so smart, and I was amazed that when we talked over Twitter, and she was saying that her book is the nonfiction like corollary to my book, and when I read her book, it really turned out to be true, but it backs up all the ideas I had with facts and studies and interviews, and instead of things I had made up. So I really think that that book is incredible, and the friends that I've recommended it to said they found it very empowering.
Just off the top of my head, one of the movies that I loved the most in the last couple of years was The Lost Daughter, based on the Ferrante book, and I just love it because my favorite thing is when they're like, she's like, I just left my children. Yeah. And the girl asks, oh, was that hard? Like, what did it feel like? And she just goes, Olivia Colman goes, it felt amazing. And I think about that a lot, and I think, like, you know, that movie I loved because it was, I mean, there's things that came before, but just like right now, like to see like a middle-aged body a middle-aged, like sort of crisis of the moment, like of reflection, and having it just be like that's just what's happening, right? Like this is a moment, not necessarily of crisis too, but also like transformation, generative growth, like expansion, right? But yeah, like that feeling of, I just think we're at this place now where people can say, and I don't want to get lost in like, oh, it's so hard. Like, I really think it's important to talk about the pleasure that comes from human connection, like, which is like what we're all here for. But yeah, to hear more and more people saying, like, it felt amazing to be without my children, to like touch who I was, who I am still. That's the kind of stuff that I'm like, that I get jazzed about these days. Yeah.
I think on that note we should end. I think we're at time.
Okay, perfect. Oh, are we at time?
Yeah,
I have no idea.
we're at time. But yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.